colossal obelisks crashed into 9 sparsely populated areas on planet Earth. Each monolith was made out of a single, city-wide, and mountain-high piece of iron. Iron is the last element a star turns into before it collapses on itself and explodes into infinity. The obelisks planted themselves deep into the Earth, rising out of the ground like giant telephone poles. It's unclear how many millions of people died when this event occurred. However, large cities were spared, and there was a minimal loss of wildlife, livestock, and crops. It seems like the landing of the obelisks was intentional and careful, respectful of life. Naturally, Earthlings panicked. Cults spun up overnight, their followers poisoned and dead by their own hands within days. The Pope considered the obelisks from space to be a message from God himself, that he himself did not exist. So the Pope doused the Sistine Chapel in kerosene and burned it to the ground. He died in a hail of automatic rifle fire, shot by his very own Swiss guards. No state funeral was held. People turned on one another, murdered, beheaded the wealthy, held orgies, and burned cities to carbon. Shaxi City, in China's Hubei province, was wiped completely off the map when a crew of 26 pro-democratic revolutionaries accidentally blew up the Three Gorges Dam before they could give the Chinese government their demands. No human being was spared the insanity caused by the obelisks. No one but Egon Soterius, a United States citizen of Greek descent. He was the first human being to live on Mars, and his mission was ending shortly. Soon, he'd be on his way back to Earth. On the 5th and 1/2 day, the obelisks vibrated, emitting a subsonic pulse that rumbled in human molars, the pits of human stomachs, and human testicles. The vibration cracked the foundation of every building within 500 miles. Elephants interned at the San Diego Zoo in California, United States, stampeded out of their enclosures and trampled their handlers. The rampage leveled the zoo's birdhouse. Scores of exotic birds were freed. Penguins died of heat stroke in the California sun. Miraculously, no nuclear missiles were launched. Several Russian, Israeli, French, and American officials admitted to clicking the red button in a frenzy some dozens of times, but each reported that there had been some unknown technical glitch that stopped the weapons from firing. After the pulse stopped, things settled down. People breathed a collective sigh of relief. Everyone felt a little weird, but refreshed. The tremor had felt like a nice back rub. The vibration calmed humanity. Humans, a notoriously aggressive and competitive species, relaxed. Fires were put out. Field hospitals popped up in every city, suburb, town, and village. Russia, the United States, China, and Saudi Arabia called an emergency meeting to fund global relief efforts. Each reduced their nation's wealth to a meager operating budget just to keep the lights on, as the fella likes to say. The meeting took 28 minutes. There was no photo op. The secretaries at the meeting each wrote in their own language. They got along famously. It's always nice to see old friends. When the wealthy nations presented the money to the UN, the other struggling nations politely declined. People were helping each other out of the goodness of their hearts. Money lost meaning. Stocks plummeted overnight, but there was no panic. Banks closed up shop and offered to send checks in the mail to clear out people's accounts. No one took them up on their offer. People started talking and sharing experiences. They spoke openly and intimately, without fear of mockery. The common thread in every conversation was that no one was having sex. Neurologists got to work. They discovered the obelisk's vibration neutralized the part of the human brain reserved for sexual drive and sexual competition. Fertility doctors uncovered that the rumble was so intense, rattling testicles and ovaries so strongly that people were rendered sterile. No one panicked. Humanity felt refreshed to see no one else as a sexual threat, even subconsciously. Freudian psychologists were proven right. They retired happily, but politely assured their patients they'd be there if they needed anything. With the drive to reproduce at any cost negated, people decided to make life better for those around them, and there was a great diaspora. Humans from historically wealthy nations went to communities who needed help. Lockheed Martin, the titan of weapons manufacturing, cleared out their plants and put their scientists to work on research and production of sustainable food. NASA used all its people power to study and do all they could to end global warming. The scientists knew humanity would die from infertility in the next 100 years or so, but they wanted to make the planet nice for all the animals they would leave behind. NASA was so committed to its new mission, they completely forgot Egon Soterius was out there in space, wrapping up a geological survey of the surface of Mars. He'd attempted to contact mission control for weeks, but to no avail. Egon figured there had been a massive communications glitch. His spaceship's AI was well equipped to land back on Earth without the assistance of mission control, but he was nervous all the same. Egon would be temporarily spared. He'd wish he hadn't been. While humanity was hard at work to leave the planet in better shape than they found it, one more trick from the obelisks awaited them. 17 months after landing on Earth and buzzing humanity into peace, a sustained pneumatic blasted out of the top of the obelisks. They shot tiny particles into the atmosphere, giving the sky a beautiful, shimmering, pinkish, purplish tint. Small flecks that looked like pollen gently rained down on Earth. The event was like a beautiful snowstorm. Humanity celebrated, grateful for yet another gift from the obelisks that had already done so much for them. But people didn't know their path to extinction had accelerated. The beautiful dust blanketed Earth. It bent tree branches with its weight, gave bodies of water a stunning sheen, and sparkled in grass like frost. Scientists took samples of the powder to their labs and began studying its properties. Within a few days, the extraterrestrial pollen sank deep into the soil and dissolved in ponds, lakes, rivers, and oceans. Flecks that were caught in the sunlight, on tree branches, asphalt, and concrete vaporized into a purple fog that slowly rose into the atmosphere. Virtually all visible traces of it disappeared. Scientists at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, United States of America, studied the dust. Some theorized it was packed with micronutrients that would refertilize the soil, perhaps eliminating plastics with which humanity had so wantonly poisoned the planet. Botanists wondered if they were alien seeds that would reforest the brutally ravaged rainforests. Global warming experts hoped the flecks were alien nanomachines blasted into the atmosphere to reverse the effects of human-made climate change. That Monday, the 9 obelisks whirred soundlessly. The ground gently shook as they rose out of Earth and back into the sky, floating towards space at an estimated speed of 86 miles per hour. In 8 months and 17 days, Egon Soterius, fast asleep in stasis, would pass them at the speed of 36,000 miles per hour. For 48 hours, the world was in a state of bittersweet mourning. On the following Wednesday, Dr. Kimberly Chen at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, United States of America, gave a televised address to present their findings. Her face was a sickly gray. She had giant bags under her eyes, and her hair was frizzy. She nervously jiggled the microphone stand until it was precisely in a position that met her specifications. She cleared her throat and spoke in a froggy voice. The properties of the individual flecks of pollen, she began, were indecipherable. They were composed of what looked like a genetic material that seemingly bent the rules of physics and biology. On their own, they were harmless and had a short lifespan. When combined, a reaction occurred. A terrible one. In the lab, the dust particles had been painstakingly separated by highly efficient robots and stored in individual test tubes. When separated, they dehydrated and turned to ash. 99% of the collected dust was lost. However, one clump of particles was put in a ceramic bowl in a locked room and heated under a lamp. When the cells, for lack of a better word, touched one another under the heat, they fused. They generated their own heat and pulled more cells towards them until they were a hot, glowing sphere. More and more of the cosmic dust particles were sucked towards the center until the mass began to take the shape of a human fetus, suspended in a sack of goo. The fetus in the lab came to term in 2 hours and 49 minutes, bursting out of its sack. It had the appearance of an incredibly muscular, 2-foot-tall, full-grown, translucent human male. He was not cute. He did not have that new baby smell. He was grotesque, and he proved to be quite violent. Lauren Kozlowski, an intern at the CDC, went through the airlock of the sealed room to check on this tiny man. He motioned for her to come over, batting his black eyes. Terrified, she approached him with her hands up. The tiny man purred like a cat. She had a cat at home named Brandon, and the purring put her at ease. She reached out to pick the tiny man up. He raised his arms like a toddler as she brought him to her chest. The scientists looked on in horror as the tiny man bit her throat with his flat teeth, similar to the teeth of a hippopotamus. He pulled out a chunk of her larynx and backflipped off her, gracefully landing on his tiny, clear feet. Lauren staggered backwards, eyes opened, gripping her throat as her life pumped out of her. The tiny man ran at her at an incredible velocity and began eating her whole. Emergency procedure was enacted. Machines manipulated the air pressure in the room, causing the tiny man to become dizzy. He fell asleep at Lauren's lap, not unlike her cat, Brandon, now ownerless. Armed guards sealed the tiny man in a tiny reinforced explosion-proof cube. Dr. Chen motioned from the podium for her colleagues to bring out that very cube. The cameras at the press conference focused on the alien in the box. He sat in the lotus position, smiling gently, completely non-threatening. Some people in the audience awed at him. Others felt like they were about to evacuate their bowels from fear. This, Dr. Chen explained, is the violent end of humanity. Upon finishing her sentence, she pulled a pair of scissors out of her lab coat and jammed them into her chest. She pulled them out quickly, emitting a 13-foot arterial spurt. The press stampeded out of the room, screaming. The public address was televised and translated across the world. A 1 million-person crowd of Chinese citizens gathered in Tiananmen Square to watch the address on a massive screen, blasting Dr. Chen's translated words through gigantic loudspeakers. They stared at the screen in silent terror. Meanwhile, hordes of tiny, translucent men were pulling themselves out of the ground around the world. Zhang Wai Li, a former soldier turned florist, broke the silence with a scream. A tiny man had crawled up his back and bit into the back of his skull. He devoured him quickly, bones and all, like tossing a log into a hyperactive wood chipper. Terrified Chinese citizens charged out in every direction. They soon found they were surrounded by thousands of the tiny men who had encircled them as they watched the address. The tiny men descended upon them and ate well. As they packed more and more human beings into their alien digestive systems, they continued to grow. The tallest of the tiny men grew to be 32 feet and 3 inches tall. Most others averaged out at 29 feet. The extinction of humanity by the once tiny, now gigantic, translucent men only took 8 months and 17 days. They fed only on humans. All other types of wildlife were spared, and they seemed to have no appetite for vegetables or water. They weren't incredible hunters, but they worked very well together. If they had been good hunters, they wouldn't have had to so theatrically pacify humanity to such an outrageous degree. It was like killing fish in a barrel. Some would trap humans and bat them around like cats before devouring them. Others competed to see how far they could throw a person, taking bets in alien currency. It seemed like they were doing this for fun. The gigantic men were immune to human weapons. They had thick skin like rhinoceri. Bullets bounced off them like raindrops off a windshield of a 1994 Champagne Ford Taurus. Humans only had small arms to defend themselves, as the vibration had incapacitated heavy, advanced weapons that relied on computerized triggers. Hence the nuclear missiles not firing when this whole affair began. The alien men had taken some extreme measures that one would consider not very sporting. A pack of 9 alien men corralled a crowd of thousands of English citizens and chased them off the white cliffs of Dover. The humans burst on rocks like tomatoes. Alien men looking for more of a challenge climbed skyscrapers in Chicago, Illinois, United States of America, pulling humans out and tossing them over their shoulders into the hungry mouths of titanic aliens below. A battalion of gigantic men split up and raided rainforests to suss out the last remaining humans who had fled for cover. Alien technology scanned the Earth and found there were only 7 human beings left who had escaped to the Gobi Desert. They were made short work of. When the last confirmed human being had been killed, the hunt was called to an end. The gigantic aliens celebrated in an odd way, stepping to the right and left with their hands in the air like crabs, intermittently barking in rapture. Once the bizarre festival ended, the gigantic men from all corners of the world headed to Houston, Texas, United States of America, for a final ceremony. It took 19 days for all of them to converge. Egon Satirius' spaceship slowly woke him from months of stasis. He was 45 minutes away from re-entering Earth's atmosphere. He stretched and yawned. He scratched himself. He felt refreshed and rested for the first time since he left his home planet. Egon left his hyperbaric chamber and headed for the controls of his spaceship. He flipped on his communications device to report to NASA ground control in Houston, Texas, United States of America. They didn't respond. He was shocked they hadn't fixed their comm system in the time it took for him to fly back to Earth. But the AI in his spaceship was so reliable, he figured it wouldn't have been worth the cost to get the comm system back up and running. He frowned at the very real possibility that his life was put in danger by a budget issue. The United States Congress was always trying to screw the little guy. Simultaneously, particles of business tycoon Remus Plimn from the planet Earth sped through space. He was scheduled to fuse and materialize in Houston, Texas, United States of America, mere minutes after Egon Satirius was to take his first step back on planet Earth. Egon landed without a hitch. His ship came to a peaceful halt, and the intercom on his ship thanked him for his stay in a soothing male voice. The blast screens went down on the windows, and he looked out on his home planet. There were no American flags. There were no "Welcome Home Egon" banners. There were no mechanics on the runway spraying his spaceship with cooling foam. But there were hundreds of thousands of gigantic translucent men waiting to greet him. This had to be a trick of his mind, he thought. He had to be hallucinating. He pressed a button at the back of his ship to lower the exit ramp. Egon took a step, tripped, and rolled out of the ship, right at the feet of the rematerialized Remus Plimn of the planet Earth.
"Greetings,"
he said in a deep, bone-rattling voice. Egon screamed as Plimn lifted him into the air and presented him to the crowd of his alien brothers. They cheered. Some wept. Egon slithered in his hands like a tadpole, desperate to escape. He could not. Once the cheering died down, Plimn set Egon on his shoulder. Egon, terrified he would fall, gripped the shoulder tightly and made no attempt to escape.
"My name is Remus Plimn of the planet Earth. I am the founder and CEO of a corporation that roughly translates into human English as Fun Boy Limited Party Travel No. 1. Earth is very far from here. The men gathered in front of you are our very top-tier VIP customers, and..."
But he couldn't finish his sentence over the cheers of the crowd. The men happy to make it known that they had bought the most exclusive, most expensive package.
"These men are part of the great community of Eartharians,"
he continued,
"who get a rush from what human beings would call on their planet extreme sports. I first got the idea when a TV signal from your planet jumbled ESPN's X Games with the show where men hunted animals for sport. Bingo, I thought."
Egon vomited down his spacesuit. The crowd laughed politely.
"This is going to hurt your feelings,"
Plimn said solemnly,
"but all humanity has been eaten by these brave, action-seeking, VIP pass-holding Eartharians in front of you."
Another cheer erupted. Egon screamed.
"You are indeed honored, for you will be known in the books of Eartharian history as the last man to die on planet Earth."
Egon rose to his feet, scrambling to jump off the shoulder of the towering man. Plimn held him in place as a shorter, older-looking alien approached him, holding a silver bowl with small rectangles in it. They looked like dominoes. Plimn reached into the bowl, mixed them around, and pulled out one of the rectangles.
"The winner is,"
he announced in his alien tongue,
"Kren Norn of West Earth." "That's me!"
An immense translucent man shouted from the back.
Make way!
Yelled Plym. Although the other men were disappointed, they cheered on Kren all the same. Kren made his way through the crowd to Plym, and they hugged. He was given a certificate to a family-style eatery back on Earth, not unlike the American chain restaurant Applebee's.
Do you have any words?
Asked Plym. Stammered Kren. He was no public speaker.
Thanks for the memories, Mr. Plym. And, it was a ton of fun, and, I can't wait to go back to my family and tell them all about it.
The crowd roared triumphantly.
Very well put,
said Plym.
Enjoy the grand prize.
Plym lifted Egon and set him in the massive hands of Kren. Egon screamed and attempted escape, but this would prove impossible. Kren raised Egon to the crowd. They roared. Kren theatrically pulled Egon into the air, clasped between his thumb and finger, and dropped him into his gigantic mouth. He chewed savagely, grinding Egon to mush. Kren swallowed and bowed. The men traded information and clapped each other on the back as they waited to disintegrate back into pollen and get scooped up by the obelisks, then sent back to Earth. They would remember it as the best trip of their lives and agreed the exclusive VIP package was worth it.